In my programme yesterday, I discussed briefly reports of some sort of Ukrainian incursion into Belgorod, and I said that there were further reports that suggested that this incursion was a fake, but of course, as I was not on the ground, I could not be completely sure. Well, events have confirmed that there was indeed a Ukrainian incursion into Belgorod, and it does seem as if a fair number of men were involved in carrying it out. It's been promoted in Ukraine and in parts of the West as an operation carried out by Russian partisans. I don't think anybody takes that claim particularly seriously. The last time anti-Russian organizers, individuals were used to carry out a raid onto Russian territory a couple of months ago. A few of them were interviewed by the Financial Times, and it turned out that they were, in that particular case, individuals with extreme neo-Nazi views who admitted that they had carried out their raid with the help of the armed forces of Ukraine, the authorities of Ukraine. And I remember being surprised that the Financial Times actually reported that. Well, this incursion does seem to have been on a bigger scale. There's some reports this morning that they're trying to take control of a border village. This is a village right on the border. There's apparently fighting there. There was a report a short time ago from the Russian Defense Ministry that they'd been dispersed and pushed back across the border. I'm not able to confirm any of this. I suspect that this incident is still taking place, but one thing can be said about it with confidence. It is of absolutely no military significance in itself. It might perhaps conceivably be a precursor of some bigger event in the future, but overall, it doesn't seem to be some bigger event in the future. Some talk perhaps of a Ukrainian offensive in this part of the border, but this incident itself, it seems to me, is relatively minor. So why was it carried out? Well, the Russian authorities are saying it was done in order to divert attention away from Ukraine's big defeat in Bakhmut, the fall of the so-called Bakhmut fortress, as the Ukrainians have referred to Bakhmut in the past. And I have to say, I agree. I would add one qualification. The Pentagon leaks disclosed that President Zelensky has been harping on the possibility of Ukraine capturing some Russian border villages or even small towns in an effort to try to trade those for Ukrainian territory, or what he says is Ukrainian territory, controlled by Russia. And this incursion, minor affair as it does appear to be, is consistent with that type of thinking. I very much doubt, I think it's almost inconceivable that the Ukrainians will be able to retain control of whatever minor border village they might have briefly occupied. Doesn't seem as if they've ever managed to capture even one properly. But regardless of that, it could be that at some point President Zelensky will order his forces into Belgorod to try and to capture some villages or border towns or things of that kind. For all I know, he might even be planning to do that as part of this offensive that we've been hearing so much about recently. If that is the plan, it is a huge mistake. It is a massive error of judgment. It is not going to make the Russians change their policies or their strategy with respect to the war in Ukraine. It's much more likely to make them intensify it and to harden Russian opinion, including opinion in the Russian government, even further, and strengthen the determination there to see this war end. end successfully from a Russian perspective, with Russia achieving all the objectives that Putin set out at the start of the war. So that is all I can say about this incident up to now. I do tend to think that the Russians are right. I think this raid was probably launched partly in response, or principally in response to the fall of Bakhmut, and the Ukrainians needed to create a story that would draw attention away from the Battle of Bakhmut and from the fall of Bakhmut, and they did it with this particular attack. Now, I'm going to say one thing. In one respect, this attack has been a failure, which is, of course, in the information space, because I've noticed that the media in the West has not wanted to cover this story in any detail. I get the sense that they're embarrassed by it for some reason, or perhaps they don't take it seriously, but certainly it's not received much coverage here in Britain. And people I've been in touch with in Europe tell me that the same is true there. So if it was intended to divert attention away from the fall of Bakhmut, the only place where it will have been successful in doing that is in Ukraine itself. Now, that brings me to the much more important sequence of events, which is what has happened in Bakhmut. Now, over the last couple of hours, I've started to see even Western media outlets that have taken seriously Ukrainian denials that Bakhmut has fallen, gradually edge towards an admission that it has indeed fallen. Even The Guardian, which was something of a holdout yesterday evening, now seems to be talking about the Battle of Bakhmut as having been essentially resolved by Russia. And I suspect that one factor in that was some commentary from the Ukrainian Defense Ministry yesterday, which all but admitted that the Ukrainian offensive on the flanks in Bakhmut has come to a stop, that there's been no further significant advances by the Ukrainian forces on the flanks of Bakhmut, that the battle, in effect, for Bakhmut has ended. The offensive there has failed. The Russians still hold their flanks. Apparently no village or settlement up to now has been recaptured by Ukraine in the Bakhmut area. Not even Sako and Vanseti, this tiny place of 20 people. So one must now, I think, come to the conclusion that this offensive that Ukraine launched on the flanks on the 10th of May, and which continued right up until the 21st of May, has now failed, and that the Ukrainians have accepted, at least for the time being, that Bakhmut itself is lost. Now, I just want to repeat here a point which I've made in my previous programs, which is that, first of all, this offensive, which was unsuccessful, appears to have